The charity gala at the Harborfront Pavilion smelled of lemon polish and paper programs, a warm hum of conversation mixing with distant gulls and the metallic clink of champagne flutes against glass. Outside, the tide breathed against rusted pilings, and late autumn light threaded between cranes like thin gold ribbons. Inside, the ballroom glowed under chandeliers, and the air held the kind of polite sympathy that folded itself into napkins and left. By the far wall, where glass showed the harbor as if it were a painting, a man in a tailored coat stood with his hands in his pockets, watching others as if cataloging scenes. The posture of someone who had learned to read rooms the way sailors read maps. Near him, Elena pushed a wheelchair with a practiced steadiness, her palms raw at the heel from 2 years of steering on cracked sidewalks. Sunlight touched the back of the chair and made the metal look almost new. In that seat sat Maya, a girl of 9 with a determined set to her jaw, a faded purple blanket across her knees, and eyes that had learned to measure people with the same sharpness she used to trace letters on paper. She tapped her fingers, slow, patient taps, on the armrest, a small rhythm she kept when plans were forming behind her quiet face. When a volunteer interrupted the flow to announce a silent auction item, someone laughed, and a tourist nearby nudged his companion, nodding toward the well-dressed stranger. "He must be someone important," the companion said. Maya listened, the air seeming to thin, and in a voice that carried like a small bell, she said, plainly, "Don't save me, save my mom." The room slipped. Conversations dimmed into a single suspended note. The man with his hands in his pockets raised his head and met her eyes, and for a moment the chandelier seemed to hang over a small island of stillness. Elena's fingers tightened on the wheelchair rim. A child 3 tables over stopped mid-bite, crumbs clinging to a lip. That quiet line, uttered without pleading, with the simple geometry of truth, shifted the temperature of the room. It felt less like a plea and more like a command carved into warm clay. As the murmurs reassembled into an awkward rustle, the stranger folded the program and stepped closer, not to the podium, but to the pair who had inadvertently altered the night's script. What followed would not be an act done for headlines. It would be a slow rearrangement of presence, habit, and sacrifice, started by a child's refusal to let pity substitute for dignity. Years earlier, Elena had learned to measure the world by its small kindnesses and its loud absences. She had come from a narrow apartment above a bakery where yeast and sugar seeped into the plaster. As a child, she had memorized the pattern of rain against the window and the exact warmth of the oven mitt her mother used to pull bread from the oven. At 15, she chose to leave a scholarship and a conservatory audition, a decision that smelled like ozone and cigarette smoke, taken on a roof where she had tried to quiet her stomach's hunger by counting stars. She married at 22 and worked nights as a nurse's aide, giving day shifts to other people's children while her son, Tomas, learned to make pancakes under the watch of a battered kettle. When the accident happened, an intersection with 1 too many red lights and a truck that answered the street with the sound of metal folding, Elena learned what it meant to bargain with time. She traded a career of rehearsals for commutes to therapy sessions, traded her savings for hospital paperwork, and traded sleep for a calendar that read in blocks of appointments and medications. Her hands became maps of small miracles. The place where a child's hair was braided each morning, the spot on a kitchen table where bills were stacked, the crease where a photograph of a younger Maya smiled in a green dress. Those sacrifices left her practical and steady. They left her with a quiet appetite for ordinary mercy. Maya's backstory braided itself through the same weave. Born with a condition that made her muscles slow to wake, she had learned to articulate needs with a gaze and a stubborn vocabulary of small victories. She once traced the pattern of a brass doorknob until it looked like a sun. She loved the smell of toothpaste and could whistle the tune of a comedy show with a single laugh. Her determination came partly from watching her mother's hands fold like an accordion to make room for everything else, and partly from an early choice. At 5, after an evening when another child offered a crumpled cookie and a patronizing pat, Maya had held up that cookie and said, "I don't need pity, thank you." That memory was a seam in her character, a place where pride and necessity met. Neither Elena nor Maya had ever imagined being noticed by a man like Marcus Hale, the billionaire who funded philanthropic wings the way some people collected stamps. Marcus had a voice that sounded like the bottom of a deep well, and a reputation like a newspaper headline. His presence at the gala was expected, his donations predictable. But standing near Maya that night, he felt a tug that would not be categorized as mere charity. He approached in quiet strides. Their first conversation was small and edged with ordinary noise, cutlery, a murmur of applause for a silent auction figure. But it featured the exchange patterns that would, over weeks, build the story. "How long have you been coming to these events?" Marcus asked, slightly off balance from being the one asked to observe rather than to be observed. "Long enough to recognize a pattern," Elena answered, voice steady, the scent of lemon polish and her own perfume braided. "And you, what brings you here?" Marcus's laugh was brief. "Guilt," he said, half a joke. Maya watched him the way a gardener watched a plant's first green. "Don't save me," she said again, the exact cadence as before. Then, softer, "Save my mom." Marcus blinked. "What do you mean, save?" Elena closed her eyes a moment, tasting a small irony, then explained, practicalities first. Unpaid bills, therapies that needed copay, an apartment roof that promised a leak come next winter. Marcus's response was cautious, practiced kindness. An offer to pay a bill, a voucher for private therapy, a gift card folded into an envelope. The exchanges multiplied. "We don't need a show," Elena said. "We need breathing room." "I want to help," Marcus replied. "Let me arrange a fund," he said, the words like a product pitch. Maya's hand found the armrest, knuckles white. "Not a fund," she insisted. "Presence." The conversation branched into 6 clear turns, where intentions tested limits. Marcus offering money, Elena deflecting, Maya insisting on dignity, Marcus proposing logistics, Tom, an event volunteer, interrupting with a schedule, and Rosa, the neighbor Elena often mentioned, smiling with the fatigue of someone who had seen too many offers dissolve. Marcus began to show up in small ways that didn't announce themselves. He did not flood their lives with cameras. He paid a month's rent anonymously, arranged a physical therapist named Nurse Joy to visit twice a week, and sent a courier with a used laptop for Elena to look for remote job postings. His gestures were like a metronome, consistent, quiet, and oddly domestic. He attended a community cooking class led by Priya, the neighborhood center chef, and ended up chopping onions next to Luis, a reporter who covered small-town initiatives. He learned the names of the barista, Anna, who made the house blend at the corner cafe, and Marisa, the school aide who always carried Band-Aids and patience. Each of these people, Tom, Rosa, Nurse Joy, Priya, Luis, Anna, Marisa, watched the pattern of his attention and interpreted it in their own registers: curiosity, skepticism, hope. The repetition of small acts is harder to resist than the grand gesture, and soon people began to talk about Marcus's new routine. He would come to the center on a Tuesday and sit with Elena while she cooked lentils. On Thursdays, he would quietly read to Maya before therapy, using the same worn copy of a picture book that smelled faintly of glue and dust. Maya counted these appearances like beads, noting whether his coat smelled of cologne or smoke, whether his hands were steady when he poured tea. For a while it was enough to stitch a new daily rhythm. Elena would bake, Marcus would linger, Maya would draw with a stub of blue crayon and push the crayons into a small tin for Marcus to keep. But not everyone accepted this pattern without question. The local press, led by Luis at the Harbor Gazette, ran a cautious piece about wealthy patrons playing savior, quoting Marisa's measured concern that help shouldn't rearrange dignity. An online op-ed suggested Marcus's interest might be a public relations pivot. A protest formed, small, organized by a community group led by Rosa's brother Carlos, outside a center event, placards creaking in the wind. Photos circulated that made Elena's hair appear unkempt and her eyes look like a headline. Marcus felt the pushback like a physical wind. One morning, a smear campaign leaked private emails implying payments for exclusive access to the Hale Foundation's goodwill. He froze. Where once his presence had been steady, now it became a question mark. He stopped answering his phone for days. That absence cut through the new routine like a knife. Nurse Joy's visits felt heavier without his check-in. Priya's soup seemed to require an absent spoon. And Elena held the silence against her chest as if bracing for an impact. Maya asked aloud in the half-light of their kitchen, "Did he leave us?" And the question landed in the room with all the weight of a window breaking. The disappearance triggered a cascade of community speculation. Tom told Marcus's driver that he had walked away from the situation. Lewis drafted yet another story with a tone sharper than he intended. Elena's immediate reaction was practical panic. She sorted papers, prayed with a kind of mechanical calm, and tried to stay tethered for Maya's sake. Yet the wound Marcus felt was different. Not public accusation, but the sight of the girl's drawing he had kept folded in his wallet. A picture of two stick figures holding hands beneath a blue sky. The words, "Save my mom," written carefully along the bottom. The drawing had been left by Maya on a table during his last quiet visit, and he had folded it into his pocket as if into a knot of accountability. It began to gnaw. He realized he had been counted on to be more than a check, to stand when the world looked away. That realization propelled him into search. He walked the neighborhood at odd hours, asking for Elena at the cafe from Anna, at the day center from Priya, at the clinic from Nurse Joy. He found Tom stacking chairs at the pavilion and asked, "Where can I find them?" And Tom replied, "They've been keeping to themselves. You helped, then you left. People noticed." Marcus went to the apartment building where Elena lived and, standing in the stairwell, smelled the faint yeast memory of her childhood through a neighbor's door. He knocked, and Elena opened with a cautious face. "You left," she said, instantly naming the breach. "I had to explain to Maya why grown people decided to stop being reliable." Marcus's apology came in simple fragments. "I panicked. I saw my name in print, and I thought making distance would protect you." Maya, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward with the small brutality of a child who knows the edges of adult hearts. "You said you would be here," she said. "Do you mean it?" Marcus swallowed. He set the folded drawing on the kitchen table between Elena's hands and said, "I mean it. Tell me how to be." What followed was a dialogue that moved through humility and practical repair across 8 clear turns. Marcus admitting fear, Elena naming betrayal, Maya asking for a promise, Marcus proposing specific, repetitive acts he would perform, Nurse Joy suggesting therapy schedules, and Priya volunteering the community center as a neutral ground. The promise he made was specific: attend weekly therapy meetings, volunteer twice a month at the center, fund a safe savings account without fanfare, and, most importantly, be present in ways that a calendar could verify. The next months were exactly the kind of slow work that heals more than headlines. Elena and Marcus agreed on a schedule that acknowledged Elena's need for autonomy. Marcus would not dictate choices, but would fund possibilities and show up at agreed times. He learned to hold the wheelchair door at exactly the moment Elena needed it, to wait with a patient smile while she sorted medication boxes, and to carry grocery bags with a clumsy pride that made Priya laugh. Maya taught him small rituals, always knocking once before entering the room, putting his phone face down while he was with them, and carrying a tin of crayons to every visit. Their routines took root in texture: the scratch of paper when Maya labeled items, the warm steam of lentil soup, the metallic click of wheelchair brakes on a ramp, the smell of lemon when Elena cleaned. Progress was incremental. A therapist named Dr. Chan introduced a walking frame and designed balance exercises. Nurse Joy guided Elena through stretches to support Maya's upper body as part of daily practice. Each tiny advancement felt like a coin in a jar. Maya flexing a finger one morning and then 2. Elena laughing aloud when a lentil recipe finally behaved. Marcus showing up to meetings with a notebook and a quiet attention that said, without fanfare, "I will keep this appointment." The community's skepticism softened as actions outlived talk. Lewis published a follow-up that focused less on scandal and more on ordinary consequence, quoting Maurice's observation that consistency is the truest currency. Anna began setting aside a small cup of strong coffee every Tuesday for Elena and Marcus to share after the center sessions. Tom volunteered to drive to appointments when weather turned, and Rosa organized a bake sale where proceeds subsidized Maya's adaptive equipment. One afternoon, during a public fundraiser at the center, the climactic moment arrived. With Dr. Chan supporting a new walker and Marcus steadying Maya's elbow, she took assisted steps across a small stage while the room held its breath. The lighting softened, people leaned forward, phones were lowered as if to honor a private triumph made public. The first step was slight and uncertain. The second came with a wider arc. The third drew a cheer that was not the hollow applause of spectacle, but the raw sound of a community reclaiming hope. Cameras flashed, but it was not the flash that mattered. It was the feeling of weight shifting within a chest. Maya's face shone with a mixture of disbelief and purpose. She looked at Marcus, then at her mother, and with a mouthful of controlled tears said, "We did it together." That scene became the thumbnail of later conversations, but its power lay in the ordinary repetition that had preceded it. The sleepless nights, the small exercises, the tin of crayons, the unpaid hours Alexander, Marcus's right hand, spent coordinating therapy schedules without announcing it. Healing was not tidy. There were setbacks, an infection that put Maya in clinic for a week, an anonymous social media smear that flared into a headline and then faded. But the rhythm of presence held. Around the 1-month mark after the gala, the household had settled into a new pattern. Elena still wound the same scarf around her neck, but she moved through the apartment with a slightly lighter step. Marcus met with Elena and the social worker, Priya, to formalize the savings plan and ensure payments would arrive without public splash. He had attended 3 community cooking classes and learned the names of most of the center's regulars. Maya had started using a small balance frame in the hallway to practice 30 minutes a day. The neighborhood noticed small shifts. Anna altered her coffee order for Elena's taste. Tom repaired a ramp that had always been tricky. Nurse Joy left a binder of resources with clear tabs. Elena wrote a short list of priorities and taped it to the refrigerator: groceries, therapy, homework support for Tomas, utilities. She crossed one item off that first week and felt something that looked like relief. At 3 months, the change felt less like novelty and more like a new baseline. Marcus no longer came as a novelty guest at events, but as a volunteer whose name people associated with the steady click of presence. He had begun mentoring a local after-school program led by Marisa, teaching budgeting basics without fanfare. Maya had progressed to walking 10 assisted steps on her better days and could feed herself oatmeal without spills more than half the time. Elena started a part-time remote role sponsored through a fund Marcus's team had coordinated, editing medical transcripts, which brought not only income but a reclaimed sense of professional identity. The center launched a small scholarship for families needing therapy copays, administered by Rosa and attended to by Luis in a follow-up piece that recognized the community's role in sustaining change. 6 months later, the scene had matured into something tangible. A small backyard ramp had been built for the family, with volunteers from the center, and a modest garden box held basil and chives that Elena tended with the same careful hands that once pulled bread from an oven. Maya walked across the garden path to collect a single basil leaf, her steps more confident, Marcus steady at her side, but no longer the central figure of attention. Tomas came over more often, bringing pancakes and loud jokes. Apartment felt fuller. The savings account remained intact, managed through a trustee arrangement that preserved Elena's autonomy. Marcus, having been critiqued publicly and tested privately, had changed the language of his giving. He no longer called it saving because he had learned that rescue implies a hierarchy he did not want to reinforce. He called it sharing space. The community, Anna, Tom, Priya, Nurse Joy, Luis, Marisa, Rosa, Carlos, continued to show up in small, essential ways. Elena looked at a photograph taken on a gray Wednesday, Maya mid-step with a basil leaf in hand, Marcus smiling quietly behind, Tomas in the background mid-laugh, and thought, with a soft astonishment, "We built this by keeping our promises." If this story resonates with you, pause for a moment and think, what single repeatable action could you take for someone who needs presence more than performance? Write one word in the comments. Maybe it's visit, maybe it's listen, maybe it's cook. Your word matters because small choices, strung together, become safety nets. Share the one habit you could commit to this month and know that reading these words connects us into a community that practices kindness through consistency rather than spectacle. Now, back to how the ordinary persisted and seeded a different future. 1 month later, they hosted a modest dinner at the center, no press, just neighbors, where Maya drew everyone at the table and taped the picture on a corkboard labeled Our Promises. 3 months later, Elena began to teach a weekly rhythm workshop at the center about managing time for families with special needs. And Marcus helped procure materials without taking credit. Anna donated pastries each session, and Tom handled logistics. 6 months later, the family had a small fund in place. Maya had improved her mobility to walk short distances unaided with a brace, and the community had adopted a rota to help with transportation and after-school care. Elena said quietly, "I learned to accept help without it feeling like a loss." And Marcus admitted in a community meeting, "I learned to be present without trying to fix everything." In the end, the most important thing was not the money nor the headline, but the repetition of small, respectful acts. A man who learned to knock, a mother who reclaimed work that fit her life, a girl who asked for what she needed in the clearest possible words. They had rebuilt a family not by dramatic rescue, but by choosing daily to show up. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to hear more like it. Stories where presence matters more than performance, and where community turns compassion into practical change. So these small acts keep finding the people who need the most.